Hello everyone and welcome to the very first Commander Tactics Deck Tech. My name is Pope. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at what might be my favorite commander, Muldrotha the Gravetide. Muldrotha the Gravetide is a soul tie elemental avatar from Dominaria, costing 3 generic, 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue. Muldrotha reads, during each of your turns you may play up to 1 permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. If a card has multiple permanent types, choose one as you play it. Muldrotha is currently ranked at number 4 on EDH Rec's top commanders of the past 2 years with over 2,500 decks, and that is for very good reasons. Muldrotha is a value machine that once online can be very hard to overcome. Being able to replay answers over and over again from your graveyard makes Muldrotha such a threat around the table. There are many ways to build Muldrotha, such as lands matter, toolbox, etc. But I wanted to make my Muldrotha deck my own, and that is why I've went with the clones theme. The deck includes an arsenal of clone spells to play and replay all of our opponent's best creatures, artifacts, enchantments. But in order to really take advantage of Muldrotha, we have to get cards into our graveyard through milling, dredging, and other effects. We should have several options ready by the time Muldrotha comes out. Because of Muldrotha's ability, almost every single card in this deck is a permanent that when played will bring with it an enter the battlefield effect or some sort of additional value. This recursion engine can easily catapult you ahead of your opponents and into a winning position. But what could possibly be better than just cloning opponents' creatures and spells? How about we steal them? Along with cloning all the best permanents on the board, we're going to take control of them, cast cards from their decks, and even bring back the biggest and best things from their graveyards. This deck is so much fun to play and offers a new take on an already iconic commander. So let's dive right in, taking a look at the clones we have in this deck, starting with Body Double, Phyrexian Metamorph, and Phantasmal Image. Body Double lets you target a creature in any graveyard. Phyrexian Metamorph has the upside of coming in as an artifact or a creature, and you can cast it by paying a Phyrexian mana instead of a blue. And Phantasmal Image only costs 2 mana, but has the downside of if it gets targeted, it has to be sacrificed. Next up we have Clever Impersonator, Vizier of Many Faces, and Stunt Double. Clever Impersonator can enter the battlefield as any non-land permanent, so this could be big planeswalkers, impactful enchantments, things like that. Vizier of Many Faces has the Embalm ability, so if you ever have trouble getting Muldrotha back, you can always bring Vizier back without her through embalming. And Stunt Double has Flash, so if you want to flash this in it at the instep of the opponent before you, or if you want to flash it in as a blocker, really, its utility is endless. And lastly, we have Progenitor Mimic, Dimir Doppelganger, and the Mimeoplasm. Progenitor Mimic by itself is a little expensive, costing 4, a green, and a blue. But this card alone can create many tokens and actually be a win condition that we'll talk about later. Dimir Doppelganger comes in as a 0/2 shapeshifter with an activated ability, saying exile target creature card from a graveyard. Dimir Doppelganger becomes a copy of that card and gains this ability. This is great for graveyard hate and any deck similar to ours looking to run lots of graveyard recursion. And then we have the Mimeoplasm that when it enters the battlefield, you can exile 2 creature cards from the graveyards. If you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those cards with a number of additional +1 counters on it equal to the power of the other one. The Mimeoplasm can be a great answer late game for any problems that we might have on the board, or if we're just looking to close out the game with a big combat swing. Now that we've seen the clones package in this deck, let's talk about how we can really make Muldrotha churn, and that's by getting our graveyard full of options to recur. Starting with Underrealm Lich, Sidisi Brood, Tyrant, and Sultai Ascendancy. Underrealm Lich says if you would draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put 1 into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. This basically means every time you draw a card, you are also incidentally milling yourself for 2, but you're getting to keep the best card in your hand. You can also pay for life, and Underrealm Lich would gain Indestructible until the end of turn, so in case any board wipes come out, this will keep him online. Sidisi Brood Tyrant says whenever it enters a battlefield, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and whenever 1 or more creatures are put into your graveyard from your library, you create a zombie. This is great mill, again 3 cards whenever it enters, 3 cards when it attacks, and you're creating a little bit of a zombie army going. There's also a great combo in this deck with Sidisi Brood Tyrant and Altar of Dementia. If you are able to mill yourself for quite a bit and get zombies out, you can then sack the zombies to continue to your mill yourself or mill an opponent for a large amount of cards. And Sultai Ascendancy is just an enchantment for Sultai colors. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 2 cards of your library, putting a number of them into your graveyard and the rest back on top in any order. So it lets you set up your draw, it lets you mill in case you get lands, really helps you just get more cards into your graveyard quickly. Next we have Satyr Wayfinder, the Gitrog Monster, and Stinkweed Imp, all great cards to help you continue to get more cards into your graveyard. Satyr Wayfinder says whenever it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 of your library. You can put a land card into your hand and then put the rest into your graveyard, so essentially milling for 3. The Gitrog Monster is a real powerhouse in this deck, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog Monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. Basically, this means you are sacking a land, drawing a card every turn, playing an additional land. If Muldrotha is online, you can play 1 from your graveyard, 1 from your hand. The Gitrog Monster is a draw engine that when comboed with things like Takeover, Dredge, etc. can really just make a big impact on the game. And lastly, we got Stinkweed Imp, which is a 1/2 flyer with pseudo death touch. The big thing with Stinkweed Imp is the Dredge 5 though. If it's in your graveyard, you're able to mill yourself for 5 and put it back in your hand, and this can really help power up Muldrotha even more. Then we got Perpetual Timepiece, Fact or Fiction, and Buried Alive. Perpetual Timepiece is an artifact that lets you just mill yourself for 2 every turn. This, again, comboed with Gitrog Monster, can help you draw more. With Sidisi Brood Tyrant, can create zombies. But along with it being a mill artifact, it also is a graveyard protection in case you get hit with a Bajuka Bog or something that might exile your entire graveyard. You can pay 2, exile Perpetual Timepiece, and then shuffle any number of target cards from your graveyard back into your library. Then we have Fact or Fiction. Fact or Fiction is an instant that costs 4 mana, and it says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, then you put 1 pile into your hand and the other pile into your graveyard. With Muldrotha online, Fact or Fiction gives you huge card advantage because basically it is saying draw 5. And lastly, we have Buried Alive. Buried Alive is a sorcery that lets you search your library for 3 creatures and put them straight into your graveyard. This is great with any of our Reanimators or any of our clones that let us target creatures in our graveyard. Next we have Dreamborn Muse and Ashiok Dreamrender. These 2 cards are 2 of my favorite cards in this deck. I love Dreamborn Muse and I love the new Ashiok. Dreamborn says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X is the number of cards in their hand. This can really impact other players' decks by making them mill several cards, sometimes up to 6-7 cards a turn. But it is also allowing us to get more cards into our graveyard to use with Muldrotha. And then we have Ashiok, the Dreamrender. Ashiok is the only Planeswalker in this deck, so that means if it is in your graveyard, you can cast it with Muldrotha as another permanent type. Ashiok also says spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controllers to search their library. This denies any tutors or fetch lands, things like that. But it also allows us to put the top 4 cards of our library into our graveyard and exile each of our opponent's graveyard. Ashiok can be a real all-star in this deck if you get her out early, and is one of my favorite new additions to this deck from War of the Spark. But now that we've got all these cards into our graveyard, we want to be able to utilize them to the best of our ability. So that's why we run cards like Secrets of the Dead and Living Death. Secrets of the Dead says whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, draw a card. With Muldrotha online, this can easily net you 2 to 3 cards per turn. Living Death reads each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyards, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. This card by itself can be a win condition. If our graveyard is full of big creatures with lots of ETB effects, and we've exiled our opponent's graveyards with Ashiok, or maybe they just haven't milled nearly as much as us, this alone can really put games away. Next, let's take a look at the lifeblood of Muldrotha and what really makes her so strong and powerful, and that is all the recursion value she can provide by bringing back permanents from the graveyard to the battlefield. Starting with Sakura Tribe Elder, Coiling Oracle, and Yavimaya Elder. Sakura Tribe Elder, we can sacrifice to search our library for a basic, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Coiling Oracle says whenever it enters the battlefield, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise you get to draw it. And then Yavimaya Elder says whenever he dies, you may search your library for up to 2 basics, reveal them and put them into your hand, and you can pay 2 to sacrifice him. These are all great, cheap ramp creatures we can recur with Muldrotha to get extra card advantage and increase our land base. Next we have removal creatures with Duplicate, Shriekmaw, and Ravenous Chupacabra. When Duplicate enters, you get to exile a creature, getting around Indestructible and things like that. Shriekmaw can be evoked for 1 and a black. This makes this a 2-cost removal that we can recur, which is very strong. And Ravenous Chupacabra says whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls. Again, all of these are permanent, so we're able to bring them back using Muldrotha or any of our Reanimator spells. Then we have World Shaper, Archaeomancer, and Eternal Witness. Each of these let us bring back cards from our graveyards. World Shaper says whenever World Shaper attacks, you can put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, so a great mill option. And then when World Shaper dies, put all land cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield. If we have milled and then World Shaper dies, there's a good chance you can be bringing back 4 to 5 lands pretty early. Then we have Archaeomancer, which when it enters the battlefield, we can return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. This is a great option if we're looking to close out a game with a card like Villainous Wealth or Living Death. And lastly, we have Eternal Witness, which is a great green card in basically any green deck. And it says whenever it enters the battlefield, you can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. This can be anything. It could be a land, it could be an instance or sorcery, or just another creature. One of my favorite toolkits with Muldrotha is her ability to really take control of the entire game. With these cards, we're able to lock down our opponent's commanders, steal their best permanents, and even take their turns. With Control Magic, Empress Galena, and Agent of Treachery, we can ensure that we will always have the best permanents on the board. Control Magic lets us take over any creature on the board, including commanders. Empress Galena is a legendary creature for 5 that says pay 2 and tap Empress Galena, gain control of target legend or legendary permanent. This means that Empress Galena can take control of opponents' commanders until they find a way to destroy them. And next is a new card from Core 20, Agent of Treachery, that says, when Agent of Treachery enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, draw 3 cards. I love the flavor of Agent of Treachery, and with Empress Galena and Control Magic and the other additional control cards in this deck, we could easily be at that draw 3 bonus. And then we have Animate Dead and the Eldest Reborn. Animate Dead is a 2-cost reanimator that lets us target any creature in any graveyard, so we're able to recur even our opponent's creatures. The downside is that it gets -1, -0, and when Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, we have to sacrifice that creature. The Eldest Reborn is another great new enchantment saga from Dominaria. On the turn we play it, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker. On turn 2, each opponent will have to discard a card, and then on turn 3, we're able to put any target creature or planeswalker card from our graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. Next we have Order of Succession, Mindslaver, and Villainous Wealth. Order of Succession is a sorcery for 3 and a blue that reads, choose left or right, starting with you and proceeding in the chosen direction. Each player chooses a creature controlled by the next player in that direction. Each player gains control of the creature he or she chose. This card alone can really disrupt the board state and cause a lot of politicking to occur at the table. Then we have Mindslaver. It's a legendary artifact for 6 that says pay 4, sacrifice Mindslaver. You control target player during that player's next turn. This card is crazy in Muldrotha because essentially if you ever get down to a 1v1 situation and you have 10 mana up, you win the game. Mindslaver does not allow the opponent to take an additional turn after this. And then we have Villainous Wealth, which costs X, black, green, blue, and it says target opponent exiles the top X cards of his or her library. You may cast any number of non-land cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. Villainous Wealth is another all-star in this deck. If you're able to put 10, 11, 12 into X, that is so many free spells to cast off of an opponent's deck, and it denies them all those cards. The last 2 cards I want to show you are Kaya's Ghost Form and Journey to Eternity. These 2 cards are great for protecting Muldrotha, which is the centerpiece of the deck, and we have to keep her on the board to keep things going. Kaya's Ghost Form says, enchant creature planeswalker you control. When enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. This is such a big deal with Muldrotha. It only costs 1 black. If we enchant it and somehow it gets exiled instead of just destroyed, it will still come right back to the field. And then we can recast Kaya's Ghost Form the same turn for only 1 black. Then we have Journey to Eternity, which says almost the same thing. Enchant creature you control. When enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control. Then return Journey to Eternity to the battlefield, transform under your control. These are both great enchantments to help keep our assets protected from board wipes or any targeted removal our opponents might have. Now that we've seen the core of the deck, let's take a quick look at what else is inside the 99. Starting with our removal and control, we have 7 targeted removal spells and 3 board wipes, almost all of which are recurable and replayable using Muldrotha's ability. Then we can take a look at our card draw package. We truly only have about 4 to 5 cards that give us more card draw, but because Muldrotha utilizes the graveyard, pretty much anything that goes into our graveyard is similar to being in our hand. So things like Altar of Dementia and things that let us mill and dredge are really just giving us more options like it's in our hand. Taking a look at our ramp package, we run 5 mana rocks and 3 recurable ramp creatures, giving us a total of about 8 ramp cards. Again, the creatures and these artifacts are recurable, so they have the upside of being rocks and creatures, but they can also be sacrificed for bonus effects and additional value. And lastly, if you're wondering how you put games away with this deck, these 6 cards are really the forefront of how you can win games. Villainous Wealth pumped to huge amounts can just close out a game. Mindslaver in an end game situation will automatically end it. Altar of Dementia says targeted player. So if actually you're able to mill out your opponent come late game, that is another option. If our graveyard is jam-packed full of all of our best creatures, a Living Death can clear the board and we can just go in for a big swing. I like Avengers Zendikar in this deck. If we have a lot of lands out, and with Muldrotha we can get a huge plant army and swing out in a combat phase and put the game away that way. And then the very last card in this deck that I want to talk about is that hidden gem that will make all your playgroups say, "What is that?" And that is Biovisionary. Biovisionary reads, at the beginning of the end step, if you control 4 or more creatures named Biovisionary, you win the game. With all of our clone options, with all of our reanimators, there is absolutely a possibility of us having 4 Biovisionaries on the board and winning the game outright. This card will turn heads and it will win out of nowhere if your friends aren't ready for it. But that wraps up this Clone Drotha deck tech. I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed sharing it with you, and I really do hope you give this deck a try. For a full deck list, make sure you check the links below, and if there are some cards that you think deserve to be in the deck that I didn't add, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to hit that like button, and if you want to see more deck techs like this one in the future, then hit that subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.